Good evening and welcome to Crossroads. There's a new threat to the 2024 elections. Anyone could create false evidence. Anyone could create video or audio that's made to look just like a political figure in order to sway public opinion. And manipulation like this is already a crime. Look, in 2016, Douglas Mackey, known as Ricky Vaughn Online, created fake campaign ads that could encourage people to cast votes that would not be counted. This included images, for example, that looked like they were sponsored by the Clinton campaign and encouraged their supporters to vote by text or by social media. Now, of course, it was fake. He was recently convicted in New York and faces 10 years in prison for spreading what are considered to be memes. Similarly, back in 2016, the Clinton campaign, the DNC, and the Obama intel community created and then disseminated false information on then-candidate Donald Trump, which made it appear he colluded with Russia. That information was used to mislead voters in 3 elections, in 2016, 2018, and in 2020. And they were also convicted. They were not convicted. Nobody went to jail for that one. But that's beside the point, folks. What's important now is 2024, and there's a new threat to the elections. This time, it's artificial intelligence. Russia could use it to spread disinformation. Internet trolls could use it to mislead voters with fake campaign ads, just like Douglas Mackey was found guilty of. AI could even be used for racism or to undermine socialism, equity. OpenAI CEO Sam Altman even told a Senate panel that the use of artificial intelligence to interfere with election integrity is a significant area of concern. Watch.
It's one of my areas of greatest concern, the more general ability of these models to manipulate, to persuade, to provide sort of one-on-one interactive disinformation. I think that's like a broader version of what you're talking about, but given that we're going to face an election next year and these models are getting better, I think this is a significant area of concern.
Well, maybe a significant area of concern, but the Biden administration, they have a solution. And the solution is massive government control over information through artificial intelligence. Look, I'm half joking here, being a little tongue-in-cheek, but this is actually pretty serious. AI can be used to create deeply convincing videos, images, and audio of just about anybody. And we can expect to see a lot of fake news using this type of technology, realistically. Some of this will be from people making online jokes. Others could be from organized groups trying to actually cause harm. Some could be from hostile countries. This is a very real threat to the very nature of truth and of reality. But look, the solution that's now being put in place may not be any better. In fact, it may be a lot worse. Some countries are pushing for verified human IDs, meaning they need to prove you're human. Others are pushing for deeper online monitoring for information, which could include basically the elimination of digital privacy. In the United States, well, the government is putting in place new AI control systems that could affect the very foundations of online information. The media establishment, most of the mainstream press, they've been pushing this narrative very hard lately. The Associated Press recently warned that these new AI technologies, they claim, are, quote, realistic enough to fool voters and perhaps sway an election. Now, we've seen some real-world examples of this, giving them some credit. People have been creating, for example, joke videos of Joe Biden or Hillary Clinton making really controversial statements. Others have included fake interviews, and for the most part, it's been done mainly as jokes. People are doing it because it's funny. But the technology can actually look surprisingly real. Check this one out. This is an interview done with Joe Rogan and Donald Trump, and it never happened. Watch.
Is it true that you won't be going back to Twitter, even though Elon Musk bought it and reinstalled your account?
Joe, let me tell you, True Social is the future of social media. It's the best, the biggest, the most outstanding platform out there. And I'm proud to say that we have exclusive agreements in place that ensure that our users will always have access to the most powerful and effective means of communication.
Now, the audio for that is purely from AI, the images they put on afterwards. It's not perfect. Some would be, some actually would find it pretty convincing though. Now, there are actually similar posts going around with, the controversy, for example, with school libraries and Target, for example, bringing on a clothing line from a designer who was openly promoting Satanism, which actually did happen. But someone created AI-generated images around this, and it really managed to fool quite a few people. Some of the images are actually very real looking. Now, keep in mind also, however, this is not just about AI videos and images. It's also about information and how information more specifically is being curated. Many conservatives have noted, very accurately, that AI has a very serious left-wing bias. Queries of news articles and stories and so on with AI systems such as, ChatGPT, they often give left-wing talking points. The technology could be problematic, especially with that, and especially in a system of government like ours in the United States, where people vote for their elected leaders based on their best judgment of public information. What happens when only one side is being shown? But we're also in one of those situations again, where, while facing a crisis, the solution could be worse than the problem. As things currently stand, the new regulations already being worked on, some already in place, could have a massive impact on the restriction of information. We know, for example, that AI has a political bias, caused in part by the companies behind them, Google, Microsoft, and others. If journalists, students, or researchers use AI for their works, the news articles and reports they create from that will also contain that same bias. Then if regulators like the federal government try to control AI or to regulate it more completely to, fight against disinformation, then they will begin regulating information at its root. In other words, they would control the system that curates information that journalists, students, and researchers at many organizations are currently using. And they could become the gatekeepers, in other words, of an approved government reality. Now, alongside this are the fact checks. Keep in mind, Twitter has broken the mold to an extent using their community note system. Something controversial, but gives people really the power to fact check. That's the ability of the Twitter community to fact check content themselves. Even Biden himself is getting fact checked. But what happens with other tools for fact checking if they rely on AI? As we're already seeing, for example, some news outlets and search engines are already doing that. What would it mean, in other words, that really it means the person who controls the AI controls the fact checks. And whoever controls the checks on information controls the information that it generates. And that brings us to the government takeover of AI. Well, folks, guess who's in charge of the new government program on AI? That'd be none other than Vice President Kamala Harris. She's your new AI czar. Stay tuned after the break. We'll be going into the government programs on AI and what that means for who controls information. Welcome back. Look, as we were discussing, the government in the United States has rolled out new programs to control AI. This is no longer hypothetical, it is happening. And this could have a deep impact on information and who controls information. Look, Daily Mail reported this. They said the White House has unveiled its plan to crack down on the AI race amid growing concerns it could upend life as we know it. And this includes notably a new plan to launch 25 research institutions that will seek assurance from the 4 big AI companies, including Google and Microsoft and others, for a public evaluation. And by public, they mean federal government. The program has a budget of $140 million, and Vice President Kamala Harris is the one in charge of it. Harris actually met with the CEOs of the top AI companies earlier this month. A White House readout of that meeting says it lays the groundwork to promote responsible innovation and risk mitigation in AI. And it includes pushes, for example, for an AI Bill of Rights and federal programs to control and influence the systems. A White House fact sheet details just a few of these new actions for what it says will, quote, promote responsible AI innovation and protect our, quote, rights and safety. Now, it notes that in addition to the new AI Bill of Rights, the Biden administration as well has been hard at work looking to control and to regulate AI. It says in February, for example, President Biden signed an executive order that directs federal agencies to root out bias in their design and use of new AI technologies, including AI, and to protect the public, it says, from algorithmic discrimination. Now, what does that mean? This is in addition to other programs for AI to control cybersecurity, biosecurity, and safety. Now, what does that actually look like in practice? Well, look, we can turn to one of the many government documents on this because they talk about it. A Biden executive order from February 16th aimed to use AI on programs for racial equity. It would, quote, promote equity in science and root out bias in the design and use of new technologies such as artificial intelligence, protect the right to vote, and realize the promise of our nation's civil rights laws. It notes that when designing, developing, acquiring, and using artificial intelligence and automated systems in the federal government, agencies shall do so consistent with applicable law in a manner that advances equity. Fancy way of saying socialism. And it adds that it will ensure that their respective civil rights offices are consulted on decisions regarding the design, development, acquisition, and use of artificial intelligence and automated systems. Now look, what does AI have to do with these? Well, maybe it goes back to that first point, the point that many news outlets are raising right now. Information and the ability for the average person to manipulate information, meaning you and I creating content. This is now regarded as a threat to the elections. But then on another point, look, what does AI have to do with racial equity and civil rights? Well, that brings us to the other federal government programs on AI. This is a joint statement you're looking at right here from the heads of the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, the Justice Department Civil Rights Division, Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, and the Federal Trade Commission. As it notes, these are the government agencies in the United States to enforce and protect civil rights, fair competition, consumer protection, and equal opportunity. Not equity, by the way. And as they note, these established laws have long served to protect individuals even as our society has navigated emerging technologies. And it notes as well, the next technology in need of this federal control is artificial intelligence, since as it states, their potential use, AI, has the potential to perpetuate unlawful bias. They're saying it could violate the law, automate unlawful discrimination, and produce other harmful outcomes. What does that mean? The statement alleges that they have the existing legal authority to control AI because they claim it will present threats to those laws. In fact, it says even directly this, quote, existing legal authorities apply to the use of automated systems and innovative new technologies just as they apply to other practices. They claim they already have the legal authority to control it. And the risk, as they state, is that AI can, quote, contribute to unlawful discrimination. And so the solution within the jurisdiction of these agencies, they claim they already have it, is to, quote, control the foundations of the AI systems. Well, not the exact quote. And this includes the data and data sets, the model opacity and access to the systems, and the design and use of the systems. In other words, they're suggesting that in order to protect civil rights and racial equity and these other things, these agencies need to control data that feeds the AI. They need to control the AI systems themselves. And they even need to control the design and the use of the AI. What does that mean as a whole? Look, taken as a whole, all of this can be kind of complicated. Government regulation on AI, in other words, also means regulation on a key choke point for the entire internet and for society as a whole. AI in its purest form, all it does is collects data and then generates content based on that data. How do you regulate AI? Well, you do it by regulating data or by restricting the ability to present data. Regulating the data at either end of that really does bring up a really serious question. Who determines which narratives are acceptable and which ones are not? Who determines which data goes against the ideas of equity and which ones do not? Who says which data violates standards on race politics? Who even defines what race politics is? And above all, who determines what should be censored and what should not? Well, stay tuned after the break. We'll be speaking with Brandon Weichert about he's the author of Biohacked. We'll be talking about the CCP's bioweapons programs and how this relates to the COVID-19 outbreak. Welcome back. The Chinese regime has large-scale military programs around bioweapons. These programs, unfortunately, tied to technology that the United States gave to the CCP. And now the U.S. and the world are facing a very real threat from China's bio programs. To learn more about this, we spoke with Brandon Weichert. He's the author of Biohacked, China's Race to Control Life. Hey, Brandon, thanks for being on Crossroads.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be back.
Yeah, always a pleasure. Well, you know, you're talking now about biotechnology, the Chinese Communist Party. I mean, just from the top, people, when they think of biotech, they usually think of like GMO foods. Why do we care about China getting involved in biotechnology or becoming the world leader on it? Like, why does it even matter?
Well, because it's literally coming to control the very building blocks of life. It is being able to use a technology that we developed in the United States, but we have ignorantly or stupidly shared with China, which is the CRISPR-Cas9 capability. That's what we use to map the human genome. It's what we are using to create gene editing technologies, things like the mRNA vaccines, where we can go in and change the very DNA to cure a disease. It's also, though, a system that can easily be weaponized, and that is precisely what China's doing with it. It is part of a comprehensive bioweapons program under the guise of a civilian biotechnology program. This is part of their military-civil fusion program, and it is the thing I fear that will be used to completely destroy the United States without ever having to technically fire a shot.
Well, you know, there are some China experts kind of on the front line, like, you know, you yourself talking about this. And I know Gordon Cheng, we spoke with him a while back, talking about actual Chinese military documents detailing how they're weaponizing, you know, of course, bioweapons, viruses and the like, that can even target individual DNA strands,
Correct.
you know, connected to different races on Earth. And it's one of those almost like big lie type things, like the Holocaust, where, you know, if it's big enough, it's almost like it almost like it goes over their heads. It seems like such a massive threat that people are almost numb to it. How big of a threat is this?
Well, we've already, in my opinion, experienced how big of a threat it is with COVID. As you know, I have pretty solid proof that this thing came from a lab. And I think that the Wuhan Institute of Virology is a military facility. They do a lot of bioweapons research and development there. And so, in my opinion, we've already experienced the effects of a Chinese bio attack. It was a minor attack, comparatively speaking, to say something like smallpox. But at the Wuhan Institute of Virology, they are actually doing gain-of-function research on smallpox, even now, even after the COVID-19 supposed leak occurred. And so, in my opinion, it's already happening. This kind of threat, we've already lived through what can happen when a weaponized virus gets out. And that was a relatively, with all due respect to the casualties and the injured, that was a relatively mild weaponized virus. So what Gordon's talking about, as you know, Gordon wrote the foreword for the book. What Gordon was talking about was actually the head of China's bioweapons program in 2019 gave a speech in Beijing in which he coined the phrase specific genetic attacks. And that's using CRISPR-Cas9, using biotech capabilities to take the biological data of an individual or a group of people and creating bioweapons that target and kill or damage only that group or individual based on their DNA. And that is where we're headed, and it's coming a lot sooner than people realize. This is why the Chinese are imprisoning Uyghurs the way they are, where the first thing the Uyghur prisoners have to do is they're forced to give over genetic samples to Beijing Genomics Institute, which is then folded into that company's massive gene bank, the largest in the world, so that they can use artificial intelligence and create the capability to wipe out undesirable groups without actually physically killing them with, the way the Nazis did with gas and bullets. They're going to do it silently and with a degree of lack of attribution to them.
Well, and it's concerning because we do know the Chinese Communist Party has been collecting biometric data, DNA samples. We found out, for example, a lot of the COVID tests are being processed in Chinese laboratories. In fact, a lot of Chinese people were really concerned about that. They were wondering, is the Chinese Communist Party collecting biometric data on us through these? And lo and behold,
100%.
even here in the United States, our data was being processed in China. Why should we care then if China has our DNA samples, if we've done these tests or whatever, and now they have our DNA? What does that mean for us?
So the problem with most people in the West, notably Americans, is we in America have a degree of separation between public and private. And so we just assume it's the same everywhere. This is the sort of American conceit, but it is not. And like I said, in China, it's military-civil fusion that they talk about quite frequently. And that is the Chinese term, as we translate it as MCF, but there's actually the Chinese term is military-civil fusion. So anytime an American or Western corporation for profit-seeking motives only goes over to China, partners with Chinese firms, those Chinese firms are at some level owned and operated and influenced by the Chinese Communist Party generally, but specifically the People's Liberation Army, their military. And so the problem is when we send these tests, these genetic samples and these tests over to China, that is inherently going to be folded into their ongoing, evolving, growing, massive, sophisticated bioweapons program, which will be used to build out these specific genetic attacks. And the goal is to use those specific genetic attacks not just to take out undesirables in China, but more importantly for China's long-term goals, to wipe out and knock out America, Europe, and other groups that are not Han Chinese who are loyal to the Chinese Communist Party globally.
Well, and on top of that too, as you mentioned, the CRISPR, data we gave to China that lets them alter the human map the human genome and then attack it in other ways. You mentioned, of course, mRNA vaccines tying into that. Of course, things that can alter even human DNA. Could those be weaponized? Because, one thing we watch is that every country had its own version. Different countries, had the Sinovac vaccine, or the North Korea, I believe, had its own vaccine. Different countries had their own take on it. And if those were using mRNA that, maybe, like you've mentioned, can impact human DNA, could that be weaponized by someone if they wanted to?
Well, yeah, ultimately mRNA is using its gene editing. And so ultimately what you use to cure cancer might be able to be used to epigenetically trigger changes to an individual or a group of people that would maybe cause them to have an aggressive form of cancer or cause them to develop some kind of incurable disease. And so, yes, absolutely, because ultimately it's everything China does, and we talked previously about my other book with Winning Space, with space, everything China does, whether it's space technology, aerospace technology, or biotechnology, What can be used for civilian purposes in these cases are dual use. They can also be used for weaponization purposes. And that is the point of military-civil fusion, and that is the point of what China does in all of these domains. And so absolutely. Furthermore, it's not just creating diseases or making other people that they don't like sick, enemies of China sick. There's also the prospect of gene doping, using CRISPR-Cas9 to splice desirable genetic traits in this, let's say, in the case of soldiers, to create super soldiers. Now, I know that sounds science fiction. Believe me, I snickered when I first heard it as well. But then I did the research for the book, and I found, oh my God, there are actual academic, from respectable scientists around the world, academic papers talking about how eventually we will be able to use CRISPR-Cas9 to do just that, to gene dope desirable traits into people. And specifically, China's military has white papers out about how they want to use CRISPR-Cas9 on their elite soldiers to splice in genes that will make their soldiers faster, stronger, smarter, more adept. In China's Nanopolis, which is where they do all their nanotechnology research, they actually grafted, using CRISPR-Cas9, infrared eyesight into rats, and they want to use that to put that into their soldiers so they don't need the actual equipment. They can just genetically program soldiers' eyesight to be able to have infrared or night vision capability. Sounds science fiction, but they're already doing it, and they're scaling it up. And that's the scary thing.
Geez, well, concerning stuff. Brandon, always a pleasure talking to you. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Well, that's all for tonight, folks. Thank you for joining us. And as always, stay informed and stay free.